ATV-TALK, the podcast. Sit down with your host industry professional, Danny Duncan, as the men and women from the ATV world bring their behind-the-scenes stories to life. Every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And remember, dream big. It could be your story one day.
Duncan Technologies International. More than 33 years in the industry building racing programs and ATVs around the world. We build winners.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to episode 3, ATV Talk. Today's episode is a very special episode for me because I have a very special man here with me. He's my hero growing up. He was the man that gave me my first ride on a 1969 ATC 90, a green one. I was 4 years old. Ever since then, I've been hooked into this industry. I love what I do. I love what I get to do. And I hope you enjoy listening to some of the old stories and some of the things that happened in the olden days, back in the 1970s and early 80s, all the way to present day. Our guest today is Danny Duncan, one of the founders of the ATV industry. I hope you enjoy the time that we get to spend today with him as much as I do every day. I'm a very blessed man. Thank you very much. And Danny, how are you today?
I'm fine. Kind of worried about just sitting here talking.
Well, you know, we've always sat and enjoyed and got to spend time talking about ATCs and motorcycles and ATVs and racing, and it didn't matter if it was MotoGP or F1 or, you know, the turtles racing across the street. We always enjoyed it. And, you know, I'd like to hear your perspective on what it was like back in 69 and 70 when that three-wheeler came into Valley motorcycle sales.
Well, we went to a dealer's show, and that was one of Honda's promotional things. They had a bunch of them on stage, and so you could look at them and touch them and everything. And my first thought was, what an ugly piece of... I said, who would ever want to ride something like that? Well, the gentleman that I worked for at the time ordered a bunch of them. And we had a parts man at the shop that immediately started doing wheelies out in front of the business and doing all kinds of things with this 90 three-wheeler, which in turn, I guess the customers thought it would be fun, and they started selling pretty good. The hop-up came shortly after, but I had been putting big pistons in stuff for quite a while before that. And so the first thing we wanted to do is make it have a little more power. And so we took pistons from other Honda models and whittled it down and started putting big bores in this 90. And I can't remember exactly, but the balloon-tired 90s didn't work too well with too much power. It's when they started putting smaller wheels on them and changing the
into a rim. What year did the rim come out on?
I can't remember. It wasn't too long after, but Honda ran a an ad on the TV showing their Hondas, different models, and this little 93 wheeler running down the beach in the salt water with no telling them that you need to wash the salt water off. So it was kind of an epidemic here in San Diego because everybody wanted to go to the beach and they thought that was great fun because you could have a lot of fun with them in the surf. And needless to say, we had several customers bring them in after they had corroded so bad you couldn't get the wheels off without destroying them. And I was glad to see the balloon tired part of it phase out, where the newer models started having rims and hubs so that you could change the wheels and tires on them a little easier.
Where did the building the intake manifolds and the carburation come into it? How shortly after that did you progressed off of the big balloon tires, or did you wait to do that until after they had a decent set of wheels?
Well, that's been a long time. I don't know how that, but when you're hopping them up, that's one of the first things you do. You put a big piston in, you port it, you change the carburetor, and on some of them we tried to adapt carburetors to the existing manifold, and then we made some manifolds, and it wasn't long before there was companies that started having stuff made in Taiwan to put a different carburetor on
most of that stuff was cast back then. It wasn't billet like it would have most likely been today.
No, because it was way quicker. To build one out of tube took quite a bit of time to set up. So we didn't do a lot of that. At first we did because we couldn't get anything else. And so we made the manifolds for them. But after we got to the biggest piston we could put in easily, they started making stroker cranks for them. And between the stroker cranks and the big pistons, we got a pretty good, healthy engine. Then shortly after that, I don't know, there was several years that the 90s, they were just 90s and they got a little better. And then they came out with a 110, and that was a little bit beefier and had a little bit more stroke and a bigger piston to start with. And so I made up piston kits to where I could put different sizes in it. I was going to look that up again, but I can't remember off the top of my head what all the different sizes.
Well, you're talking early 70s at this point, mid 70s?
Mid 70s. That was a long time ago. I can't remember the dates. I know that the biggest ones that I made were 160s, and that was with a stroker and a big piston with a sleeve, and the pistons got up over 60 millimeters. We used Honda 750 pistons for quite a while. We used some pistons from other models for different sizes. We had a setup to where you run a 58 millimeter stroker and a 58 millimeter piston, and they were healthy, but they lived. They weren't. They didn't give you problems. The 160s, you had to baby them when you pulled out on something solid because you could strip out the third gear because they were kind of weak, and you had that much power. It started out at about 4 horsepower, and
What do you think you were getting at?
15, 18. Yeah.
I mean, for a little motor like that, that's a lot of change.
The more horsepower you got, the more selective you had to be on how you used it, because
Do you think that was a trend with the manufacturers back then, that they built the most of the product to be so durable that you could get more horsepower out of them because of the design to last versus the design to make them planned obsolescence like it is today?
No, I believe that they built them to last, basically because the fact that the general public can just really abuse things because Honda guaranteed it. So if you went out and just rode the hell out of it and broke it, you just brought it back and they fixed it. They modified that over the years, but I seen some warranty work that was pure abuse, and Honda just smiled and gave them a new part. So,
Do you think that they would analyze those pieces? Do you think they really went back and looked at how they could make it better? Or do you think they were just trying to build their reputation and brand?
I think they were just trying to build their reputation because of the fact that Hondas were, in my opinion, were good from the start. The little step-throughs that they started out with. I worked for a guy named Sailor Main that sold a lot of those little 50s, and
that was a step-through motorcycle, like a glorified. Well, it's a better than the scooters they sell today. But it was a 50 cc,
a little 50, and then they started out with little pushrod 50s, and they were pretty good. They'd run, down the street pretty good. But they kept coming up with new models, and off of this basic 90, like I said, the first 90s were pushrod, and then they went to the overhead cam, and but for years everything was based off of that original overhead cam 90, and
that motor's still used today.
Yeah, you see versions of it. They've refined it. It had a good oiling system. The air filter systems on them from the start. If you got them out in the dirt, you had to really pay attention to it because of the fact that they
weren't the greatest.
They weren't very good.
Not like some of the stuff that you see today.
No. Where they put the air cleaners and everything helped quite a bit because they put them up inside the frame. And so they were not easy to get to. And so customers, the owners just didn't service them like they should. And when we modified them, we put aftermarket filters on because you couldn't get the bigger carburetor and the angles back to use the stock filtering system. So there was several of the filter companies that made
little
clamp-on filters for them.
Out of necessity, because there was no way to make an airbox that would work.
No, and on the little things, there was just no place to put, an airbox. And
I remember on the 110 that Lauren had, the white one, you had to watch your leg would rub that filter, and it would rub on the fender because it was the only way that it came out. It was right there.
Yeah, it was there. I don't remember all the setups that people adapted to that.
So when you were developing the motor parts, you were, and this is going off my memory as a young child. I remember seeing you have pistons welded on the top, and then you would put them in the mill and mill them down to a specific size. Was that for raising the compression ratios to match the stroker cranks that you were putting in the motors? Because I know you did a ton of it out there. I mean, the mill was constantly running.
When I first started, we didn't have the strokers, and so most of it was head work and the pistons. And yes, I would buy pistons and I would weld the top up and then mill them in so that when you clayed the cylinder, when you put a cam in there, you had to make sure that the valves didn't get tangled up in the piston.
Who was your cam grinder back then?
Kenny Harmon's built a lot of them.
I know that we use Megacycle a lot now. I mean, I was just wondering, when did they come into the picture?
Megacycle came in with the 185s and then the 200Xs and I had such good, before Megacycle, I used a guy named Norris. In fact, the owner of the company first name was Norris, and he had an employee that was a Norris. And they made bitch and cam and needle bearing rocker arms for the 185s and then the 200Xs and a variety of other models.
What year do you think the 185s came out? 81? No, it had to have been before that.
No.
In the 70s at some point, right?
At some point. I remember that was the big thing, and it was solid. It had no suspension. The tires were the suspension. And so we built triple clamps and got forks off of other things and put suspension on them, on at least front suspension.
So the guys racing today, if we took them back in time, how do you think they'd do with some of that rigid stuff that you built?
The front runners have enough talent. They just adapt to what was there.
You want to race bad enough, this is what there is.
You race what it is. And you're racing against competition that has to run basically the same things as you do. We always tried to give them a little more power, a little everything. But the hop-up stuff was a lot of carryover from the little minis that came out. They called them monkey bikes and minis. They were a little 50cc short wheelbase bike, and the first ones of those had about 1.5 inches of fork travel and solid rear suspension, and we put 90 big bore 90 top ends on a bunch of them, and they were fun to ride, And
is that the same, the PE50 that you broke me in on and Lauren in on? Is that what you're basically?
That 50 is this, but that's where I started moonlighting, and the dealership that I worked for would sell the guy one, and I'd take it home and make it a little faster.
A good deal, right there.
Oh, it was fun.
So you started hopping that style engine up before the 90s came out, so you already had an idea where you were going to go, kind of, on the development for the engine portion.
Yeah, because there was a shop down the street, Don Vesco's shop, and the crew down there thought that their bikes were faster than ours, so we decided to hop up one of the demos, but we didn't tell the owner. And it outrun the Yamaha from down the street, and they, unbeknownst to them, it was had a big piston in it, and they sold it. And the guy, it had it for a little while, and it leaked off some oil, so he was going to have to replace the gasket. And I don't remember exactly what happened. Anyway, my boss got a little anxious about hopping it up, and wanted to know, was going to give the guy a complete new top end stock. And the guy says, no, I want it the way it is. I just don't want it to leak. And so it was so funny because
he liked it.
He liked it. It was one of the last of that model, because they went through an overhead cam 90, so the pushrod 90s were
on their way out.
Were on their way out, and so that all worked well. But Tommy told me that he didn't want that to happen anymore. So we couldn't. We had to take stock bikes and race against Vesco's
with stock bikes.
Yeah, because he had Yamahas and we had Hondas, and it was a fun rivalry.
So when you got farther into the development of the 9110s and were racing them at Speedway 117, and we roll into the later 70s, a big change happened in your life, and you no longer worked at the dealership because you started your own business.
Right. I had been, I had an arrangement with the shop for that I would bring all the work through the dealership, And if we had to take it apart or put it back together, that it would be done on the, and the shop would get paid for the time. But for the port work and the other things that I do, or would to them, Borna cases and this and that, I would charge. And I tried to talk him into buying a mill, and he didn't want to become a speed shop. So I bought a mill and a lathe and done a whole lot of that type of work here at the shop.
Basically self-taught machinist.
Yeah, I worked as in aircraft for a number of years, so I was familiar with the machines, and I bought a mill and a lathe, and I had 2 boring bars, and for quite a while I bored cylinders for quite a few of the shops in town, because everybody that bought a little 90 seemed to want at least a big bore piston in, because it made a noticeable difference.
I hated scraping those gaskets. God, they were horrible. Oh my God. So 1977 rolls around. Danny's Machine Works opens up. You are building engines for...
I built engines for Ricky Johnson, and done the service and everything on his. And that was kind of why I done a lot of motorcycle work, and I called it Danny's Machine Works. And nobody ever saw the connection. They thought Danny's Machine was a machine shop. And yes, I had machines, but to do the job at hand. And it wasn't till quite a number of years later that the name was changed to Duncan Racing.
But wasn't there an affiliation with a company that was helping support the racing guys, the team that you had with the three-wheeler stuff?
Yeah, in somewhere around the 80s, when Three Wheeling Magazine first came, they formed a group, and Big Al's Motorcycle Parts, which they were one of the bigger companies that sold pistons and big bore pistons and cams and everything, and all of that came out of Taiwan. And I done the engine work on I think it was 6 of them.
There was quite a few of them. Well, we can go back and look at the cover shot of the magazine, because it was the first edition ever shot by Three Wheeler Magazine.
Yes.
And you're standing on the cover in the background, as always, never wanting to be in the front.
Yeah. Yeah, that was Joe Phillipson, which had been the parts man at Valley when we were both there. And he was involved in it, and there was a sign painter, which I can't remember his name now, but he done all the paint work and artwork for the group. And We held our own in the competition.
Which we've talked over the years. 3B Lightning had some stuff going on, and they were just down the street from the shop. When you moved into Santee, when you were here in Lakeside, there was nobody around us. But when you moved down into Santee, 3B Lightning was down the street or across the airport, and they had their own set of guys that were riding different styles of machines, mostly some custom design stuff, where you were doing mostly production models, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, I built engines for quite a variety of racing. I built XR75s for the minis, and I built. I worked on just a variety of different engines because.
Well, the XR75 era for you was Valley Motorcycles and yourself, but you were also fielding. You had Ricky Johnson and Scott Myerscough.
No,
Myers. Scott Myers.
Myerscough was a Yamaha. He was on the other side of the...
My mistake.
Yeah.
So you had Myers, and for some reason, I'm missing a couple of the names of the kids. Lauren rode on there. Steve Walker rode on there. And there was a couple other guys that all of them became forces to be reckoned with in their specific discipline, where Ricky became a supercross star and an outdoor star. Steve Walker was super fast in the desert. We knew Burnsworth, and he was no slouch in the supercross, never got to Ricky's status, but he was a good rider. You became friends with Dick Lachine.
Yeah. Dick owned, I believe they owned Lemon Grove Honda, and we both built engines for. It started when I met him around the time that we were doing the minis, because he had a son that they built stuff for, and I bought parts from him, and then I bought fuel and oil when he progressed into what's the hell's the name?
Maxima.
Yeah.
Maxima Racing Products.
Yeah.
Nobody would know his son, Ronnie Lachine. That's...
Well, during this time, it all kind of run together. The three-wheelers, the motorcycles, we raced whatever model was the most popular, and it went from the 9110s. We also done a whole lot of 70s, because the 70 class was popular because they were small, but they were fun to ride, and they were easier to ride than the 9110s, because there was so much body English to get the 110 to go the direction you wanted it to, where the 70 was a fun bike to ride, and it was actually pretty good for kids because it was more like a tricycle, and it steered the direction you wanted to.
You broke your kids in on them, and your grandkids, and your grandchildren, your great grandchildren are riding them also. So some of the 70s that came from that time frame, are still in the family today.
Well, I bought a 70 for my first granddaughter, And after watching her ride, I detuned it because she went way faster than I wanted my grandkid to go.
I haven't watched, but one of my grandkids ride too much, and I don't. It doesn't unnerve me as much as some things, but I get it. That means that I have 6 grandkids, that are your 6 of your great grandchildren.
Yeah.
So we roll into, we've bounced around all through the 70s, a little bit into the early 80s. Danny's Machine Works is a force to be reckoned with at Speedway 117. You've made a name for yourself. Lauren and I are still young at this point. As you roll into the 81, 82, 250R era, you do some 250 two-stroke porting and some motors. We start the racing those starts to become more prevalent than riding the older 4-strokes because the 250s had so much more power.
Well, the beginning of the 9110 era, or the end of it, was when the 185s came out. They started with more horsepower, and they just were they were instantly, I thought, popular. So we started doing the same thing to them. Big pistons, strokers. We had problems because of the setup on the first ones. The clutch had a different type of a clutch, and we worked with Barnett Tooling. They built clutches and done a lot of clutch work, and we worked with them and developed a setup. And then, like everything, the new models came out, and Honda had changed. So hopping things up, it seemed like you had something new to deal with every so many years. One of the most fun projects was the 200Xs. I developed quite a few things, and it was all basically the same thing. You make the displacement bigger, and make everything lighter, and it just tends to make more horsepower. And that's we got into megacycle cams.
With the 200X?
With the 200X is where really started, and we've been using them, almost exclusively on everything, since then.
Oh, they're a great company to work with. But so you developed an oil cooler for the 200X. You developed the small body Mikuni carburetor that you used on that machine. You worked with making it start easier because stock form they didn't start very
stock. They got hot. They were hard to start. When you put the different carburetor on them and hot, cold, they started easy. And
they had a shifting issue that you had a fix for.
Yeah, all of this kind of things. A lot of things that you fix. There's other people out there doing the same thing, so it's hard to know, who was the one that, figured it out. It's kind of straightforward repair. If it jumps out of gear all the time, you take the gearbox apart and find out where the mismatch is.
Right.
And then we had some spacers. So you moved a gear or put the spacer on the other side and do a little, I believe I'd done a little grinding on something to make everything work
better.
The problem went away.
Well, the 85 three-wheeler sent us, I say us because I was trying to ride at the time, into a different realm, because in our local area, Verona Oaks, or Verona, Hidden Valley Speedway was where we raced three-wheelers, and the very first version quads got raced there too. But we were pretty much the dominant force up there. Vase was a competitor, and Scribbs was another guy that would come, and there were people that would come all the way from LA. That's how I met Mike Mead. At the time, it was just Mike Mead, but as some people know it in the industry, it was MMF, and then now it's AC Racing. Other people, I'm sure, came through that realm that I probably was too young to realize who they were or remember the names. But as that transitioned for us, we started transitioning into going to the big races. So we went to Porterville. We went to Washougal, or we went up to Washington and raced. This opened up a whole new avenue for you building the 200X motors for a bigger venue of people.
Yes, I got a lot of engines shipped in that just amazed me at times, that our circle of performance was ever widening, and that led. You had a guy working for you, and he did a side project for you on an 82 250R. And this is an older machine that, okay, we've passed its day. We're into the water cooled, but you had this air cooled three-wheeler, and you guys did a side project thinking that you could create an IRS three-wheeler. Oh, yes. Yes.
We still have the pieces.
We still have it. In theory, it worked fine. And in the sand, it worked fine. But if you jumped it into a hard deal, the chain and brake and everything was too low, and it got tangled up in the ground. In the ground.
I know it didn't turn, but going straight sure was a thrill.
Well, it had its limitations, and we didn't know how it was going to respond until we built one, and then took it out and tried to ride it. And as long as you were in the sand, so that the sprockets and everything could bury themselves in the dirt, it worked okay.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was an eye catcher. It still is. A lot of people still really enjoy looking at it. That three-wheeler sitting out in front of Danny's Machine Works on the boulevard down there in Santee, which was Prospect Avenue. It was a pretty busy street at the time. And a young man in a Toyota pickup on his way to the dump drives by and stops to look at it. I don't know if you remember this day, but I do. I'm a young kid, nobody. And Lauren spent time talking to him, which this would change all of our lives, and we didn't even really know it. That was Marty Hart.
I didn't.
Yeah, and Marty spoke with Lauren for a little bit. It was on a Saturday.
did his thing, went to the dump, came back, and they stood and had a long conversation, and that started their relationship, and that was 86.
That's right about the time that we closed and moved it back up.
Moved it back into Lakeside. Yep. And 87, Lauren became Marty's mechanic, and the rest of that portion is kind of history. I know we've skipped all over the place, and you were a motorcycle racer in the 50s and the 60s, a little bit in the 70s, when you're until as you tell it, your two little fat sons needed to eat rather than you going racing. So did you learn all of the tricks about doing engine modifications from racing back in the day, or was it something as you developed into modifying the machines because you worked at the dealership?
Well, when I got into racing, I was working in aircraft. Back in the 50s, there was a lot of work done on in aircraft, modifying tooling for updates, working. They were a lot of job shops, is what they called them at the time, and there was a lot of work. And I always wanted to work with my hands. I started out as a box boy in a grocery store, and I wanted to build things, and I got a chance to work in a job shop. Well, at the same time, I wanted a motorcycle. I wanted to go racing, and in the area where I lived, there was a kind of an area like a slough. There was kind of a big drainage ditch that turned into a lake, and everybody went out there and rode. I guess every area has a spot like that in town where they. Anyway, I bought a matchless in 1953 iron barrel single cylinder matchless, and it was a 1953 model, and this was 1956, and when I bought it from the dealer, it started, and shortly after I had difficulty in starting it, and they leaked oil. And anyway, I was not a mechanic, and I raced it a couple of times, desert racing, which I did not like. I always figured I wanted to see where I was going, that bouncing through the desert at high speed, not knowing what the terrain's going to change. Anyway, I thought early on I wasn't going to be a desert racer. I have some good stories about different times. I raced in the last official Big Bear race that they had, which was an annual that had been going on for a number of years, and it went from the desert to Big Bear City. And anyway,
how many guys were in that race that you remember?
There was over 1,500 on the starting line, and the very last race, they had a false start, and about 400 guys started on the false start, me being one of them. And at the time, I was riding a Jawa that was set up to run alcohol. And anyway, for the first unofficial lap, I done real good. At one time, I was going out across the desert floor, and I was in like a dust cloud, and I could see the bike in front of me barely, and I decided that I was going too fast. Just because I was wide open on this thing, and I don't know, maybe go 60, 70 miles an hour. And I decided to slow down. And as I kind of eased off on the throttle, a wheel come up under my elbow. The guy behind me started coming up, and I decided, well, I can't slow down. I'm going to get run over. And so so we're going along, and then we came out of this dust cloud, and there was about 7 of us in this one little tight jam there. I don't know how we all got so close together, and nobody fell off, and within sight of the pits, I ran out of fuel. Just using more. I had a big tank on the bike. Anyway, did
that teach you that you should stop for the pits?
Well, it taught me that just because you can go fast, on a desert, you got to, in order to finish first, you must first finish. And I had things backwards. Anyway, when I lived up in Los Angeles when all this was going on, and then I moved to San Diego, and I bought another bike, one that was a race bike, and extremely slow. But I started racing in San Diego, and immediately found out that this race bike that I had bought needed repair, and I didn't know how to do it. And at that time, you could get repair manuals for bikes that were built in the 1920s, but there was hardly nothing like it is today, where you can buy
a service manual,
and everything. You could buy them for the new bikes at the time, but to get it for older bikes, and this motorcycle that I had was a Dot, which supposedly meant devoid of trouble, but
that's not what it meant. That's not what it meant. Huh?
Anyway, and it came from England, and if you at that time, I thought that you needed to put stock parts on things, that you didn't make things. And so my idea of what you needed to be a racer was quickly changed in the fact that I couldn't afford to take it to a shop. So I started doing things myself. And one of the first things I found out on these bikes was that the filter systems were almost non-existent on the older models. They came with a little housing, and I don't know if you know what chore girls are, but it's like copper shavings that's in a little pad, and it keeps the rocks out. It
didn't keep the dirt out. It kept the rocks out.
Dirt out. It would keep the rocks out.
You needed to keep the dirt out.
So I found a filter setup on that would work, and mainly just at that time I was just maintaining my own bike, and I sold the Dot and I bought a little BSA single, and started racing, and it needed repairs. This is at a time where I knew nothing, and so I did go down and I bought a parts book and a shop manual, because I found out that if you look in the parts book, it tells you what parts are there, and the shop manual gave you a vague idea of how it was assembled, so that you knew how many washers were in or spacers were in the transmission, and it give you a good idea of how things work. So as I started working on my bike, and later on, everything that I worked on, I wanted a shop manual and a parts book. And somewhere along the line, they went to microfiche. But a lot of times when you're taking engines apart, there's bolts that hold the cases together that you don't see, or they're not obvious. So I found that if at first it doesn't come apart, there's usually a reason.
I remember that lecture.
Well,
What are you doing, kid?
If I heard a hammer in the shop, I started wanting to know why. You know?
I remember that. That's not how I taught you to take that apart.
But it's one of the first things is I thought that everything was stock. You didn't screw with it, you know. And then I had my BSA apart because it was smoking pretty bad. So I was getting ready to buy a piston and have it bored, because I didn't have any tools or anything. I was over at a very good friend of mine's house, and he had a BSA, and it was extremely faster than mine. And he had a habit of, when he'd take things apart, he'd lay them out on the bench and put a rag over them. Well, he went in the house for a cup of coffee, and I picked up the rag, and that piston is a lot bigger than mine. And so I started investigating and found out that he had
a big bore.
They didn't make it. He made the big bore from another model BSA, and if you whittled a little off of the top, it went right in and made lots more power.
So that's kind of where
I got the idea that, hey, it makes them go faster if they're bigger. And at that time, the association, you had a limit on how big the piston could be, and it was 80 thousandths over. Well, that's a lot, quite a bit, you know. And so that told me to, I got a bigger piston and put it in. But trying to get information about how things worked, the motorcycle magazines at that time showed you pictures of bikes, but it didn't show you how-tos. It was rare that it would show exploded views of exotic things. At that time, the Honda 4s were, a work of art. They had several different four-cylinder machines that were running in Europe, and so I would read the car magazines, and every article they talked about taking weight off the flywheel. Well, the motorcycle flywheel and the car flywheel is a little bit different, but I thought if they're lightening up everything that moves, and so I started lightening up the things that moved on mine. and it made a world of difference. So when I went to work for a dealership, because aircraft kind of collapsed in the early 60s, and so I needed a job, and I went to work for you can
Edison.
edit this out.
Edison died.
Edison. I went to work for a guy named Edison Dye, which I've read articles of what he brought motocross to America. And I worked for him for quite a bit of time. And at the same time, I was the parts man, the salesman. I'd done a little bit of everything. And then I worked on servicing bikes and everything. And a lot of this is, self-taught. I went to several dealer schools where they would show you how to work on their product. And all the time I would work on pop-up jobs or work at my house and different things. I was a big fan of four-strokes.
So you're happy nowadays.
Yeah. Two-strokes were very... I'm looking for a word. You do a little bit to them and you could get some good results out of it. But I liked the four-stroke, especially when I was racing, because I liked the fact that when I turned the throttle off, it slowed down. With a two-stroke, it doesn't always slow down.
And the brakes that you guys had back then were horrible.
Yeah.
First time you made me ride one of them Triumphs you put together, I thought I was going to die. I'm grabbing the brake and it doesn't stop.
No, even at best, they were not good. That's why they invented disc brakes, so that you could stop that shit.
Well, as the transition, back into our 80s, early 90s transition, you went to work for Convair, and Lauren kind of spearheaded Danny's Machine Works and turned it into Duncan Racing, with the development of the relationship with Paul Turner and Marty Hart. He ended up taking over Paul Turner as well. So you're looking early 90s, and things are developing. In 89, Marty won a Mickey's title, and then his time had passed with riding ATVs, and Lauren worked with guys like Charlie Shepard and Mark Earhart, and Lauren goes international to Japan.
With the bike that I built, we took a 250, because it was a 250R.
That's a little later, the one that went over to Europe and where they put the CR500 in.
Yeah, I put a CR500 and he went over there and won a big race.
But the one that he went with Charlie was a 250. But what I'm hunting for is your reaction to the change in our geography, because we're no longer Lakeside, Santee, El Cajon, or San Diego. We're now international, and you see a huge change in the development of the company that you started. And I'm looking for a perspective here.
Well, I look back at that and I felt that some of the stuff I built in racing, when we went to local races, we were competition. And when Lauren took over, we started being competition everywhere we went. We built the same engines. We hooked up with good riders and everything all over the world, and we built turnkey quads for a lot of years and sent them to places where you didn't think there was any money.
or that there was ever a race to race, So, yeah, I mean, at this point in time for me, I was not paying attention a whole lot. I was trying to race locally myself, and working. I didn't start working directly for Lauren. I worked for you, but in '86 or '87, I started working somewhere else, trying to build houses for a little while. And I came back to Lauren in '90 or '89, excuse me.
Well, even though I went to work in aircraft again, I went back to work for Convair. I never missed a day. I had a day job and a night job because I still did a lot of R&D work, machine work, boring. Somewhere along the line, we bought a Surdy, and
you still work for the shop, Dad. You're 85 years old, and you're still working in the engine facility with Lauren.
Yes. I liked having a list of things to do where I didn't have to talk on the phone. I hated that because of the fact that I can remember getting to work in the wee hours of the morning, the phone would start ringing, and a job that I'm supposed to have out, I answer the phone and I forget what job I'm working on because I've got so many of them set up, and I got tired of working that way. I was glad that Lauren stepped into the driver's seat because I like it when I know what I'm going to do, and when I get done with that,
there's another list.
I don't have to talk to people on the phone. I like people, but I don't want to talk to them, especially when I've got work to do. But no, that worked out well for. I think it worked out well for him and me because the fact that I worked so many hours. When I was done, I went home. I didn't have to sweat the small thing.
Well, yeah, he took over the brunt of it, and I get that. I mean, I came to work for him in '89 and started learning my trade or my craft. I'd learned a lot of mechanicking from you and some light machining. So, I think I was an instant help to Lauren because I could work on the machines and I didn't need a lot of overseeing, even though Lauren oversees everybody. You can't do anything for that guy without him looking over your shoulder or checking on it.
When his mother was involved in things, she was the same way.
I kind of have some tendencies when I'm working with individuals to do some of the same stuff, to look over their shoulder or to check on them. Not as much as Lauren does, but.
Well, I kind of have liked the transition because when we're doing development work, it's nice not to have your train of thought interrupted every 10 minutes with the phone ringing. And to be the guy on the phone, you have to,
you almost have to just do the phone.
You just do the phone because the fact that.
I loved working in the shop. And I know that through the years, my role has ended up probably not where I would have picked for myself, but that's where the company needed me to go. So that's what I've done. I spent a lot of time on the phone, spent a lot of time invoicing on the calendar, on the emails. I do what I can for the company the best that I can. I mean, I love my heart and soul is into the racing and what we do there. I mean, that's just, I love the racing portion of it. Maybe I was never the racer that I ever could have been, but I love going to the races. It's just,
I loved racing. I just couldn't afford to race, and there wasn't enough hours in the day to make a living and work on a race bike and go racing because it's time consuming.
Well, when you are a independent and you work in the industry and your job is to prep other people's machinery and do other jobs like that, it kind of ruins your racing career or your riding hobby because you don't have the times to do it.
Well, I always thought that having the business ruined a good hobby because that's what it started out as. But I lost my train of thought.
Looking back, go ahead.
Looking back, I liked times when we had riders because of the fact that I liked it when it was my bike. And, I can remember back when we had the minis, the damn bike isn't for you to sit on and lounge on or play with. It's here to race. I don't want somebody screwing with it or sitting on it or twisting the knobs,
Right.
And
I'm still very much that way.
I went round and round with several young guys when we were doing minis, and then as time gone, I put a lot of time into some of those race bikes, and I didn't want them screwed with and not be ready to race because everybody seems to want to twist any dials or knobs or
working for people on their machines. It's their machine. You're just the guy that put the time in and did all the work and set it up. And some people don't see the hours and the sacrifices you make to do those things, and they don't see how much blood, tears, and sweat are in them.
It's just like we have a very good friend that I was working on his bike, and I told him to leave it alone. And he came in while I wasn't in the shop and started touching things and pushing it around, caught it on fire, and made a hell of a mess out of things.
Well, yeah, it's just, I get it. I would definitely preferred owning the machines that rolled out of the trailer for the races. When you work for somebody for their program, it's one thing, and you're not the shot caller. I mean, you make 80% of the calls, but that's that 20% you got to watch out for because you may have to direct it in a different direction. They're going right, and we need to be going left here. You're going the wrong way, and you can't always get them to go where you need to go. Most of the time, it works out. They start understanding. Hey, I've been doing this for a long time, and I understand what your goal is, and I understand why you want to go do that. But that's not what you asked me to do, and that's not what you asked me to set up.
Well, I don't know if we want to get into this part of it. Most every guy you build an engine for wants one that he can walk through the corners and get on the straightaway and pass everybody and then slow down and creep through the corners.
It hasn't changed in
in the 50 years that we've been doing it hasn't changed. And
No.
not everybody understands the nuances of making a machine fast or making a machine go fast. It's momentum. You don't want to lose your momentum. You have to keep your momentum through the turns.
When I was younger and I was wanting this huge horsepower, and a rider told me, he says, if you want to go faster, he says, leave it on longer and turn it on sooner.
And it's still true today.
Yeah.
You drive into the corner deeper and you come on sooner so that you don't lose the momentum. We've kind of got into an area in conversation here that's fun, and I really enjoy it. But I want to go back into our conversation a little bit, and perspective. When you go back to that first day when you saw that 90, and then you sit back now and you look at where we are and what it's become, what's your overview, or what would you have to say about that?
Well, the 90, I never thought it would go anywhere, because the first time I saw it, I thought it was ugly. Who would want one? And that proved me wrong, because lots of people wanted them. They wanted them to go faster. And they were just one of the errors where I don't know how many years they really lasted, but people enjoyed racing them, and they enjoyed just playing around out in the desert, going up seeing who could get up the hill the fastest. They were just turned into a really fun thing to have. I never thought I'd be making a living off of them, when I saw them. But they changed pretty rapidly from the first ones that were there with the balloon tires. Just the tires made a world of difference in the bikes. But
look at today. Did you ever envision any of this?
No, but then I looking at the motocross, the bikes and everything, there's so much, they are kind of signed like a work of art. And right off the shelf, they haul ass.
This is a family show.
Anyway, if they keep making them as good as they do, it's going to be harder to make a living off of fixing them.
Yeah, well, we can count on the general public to destroy them. I mean, don't change the oil, or don't clean the air filter. Don't tighten the chain. I mean, there's just the normal things that people aren't going to do. Look at the UTV industry; they're destroying those brand new daily. So,
well, yeah. Not to along the time that we were doing the 9110s, the 90s, their era was fairly short, because then the 110s came along, and the engines were easier to work on, mainly because things got a little bigger, cylinders, and anyway, along in that period of time, there was a couple of insurance companies that decided that they would insure motorcycles. They were short-lived because of the fact that they insured race bikes. And guys would buy these motocrossers for play bikes and go out and fall off of them and bend the tank and the bars and the forks and come in and get all new stuff. And the insurance paid for it. And that I thought it was funny because that didn't last too long. They found out that that was a bad investment, bad market to insure because of the fact that you knew a dirt bike was going to be fall on the ground once in a while. And anyway, it's just one of the things that I thought was funny as I worked at a dealership.
Well, I really appreciate you sitting down and spending some time. I know that you and I talk all the time, and I've been very blessed to have a teacher such as yourself to guide me through life. That's a whole nother conversation, but I would like to see if we could maybe get you to come back and do another episode and talk, bring it into the future, maybe talk some old racing, just see where the conversation goes, because the perspective of where we were to where we are, it's pretty overwhelming if you look at the history of the family and where we go and what we've done. And we're no better than some of the other people in the industry as far as the things that there's been other people that have accomplished great things. Don't get me wrong. And yes, I'm biased, and yes, I'm prejudiced because I believe that it's pretty incredible. I'm sitting here with a legend, and yes, it's my father, and yes, most of my friends and most of the people that I grew up with have come to you throughout the years, and you've fixed so many things for so many of them. I mean, there's hundreds of people that I know that you've saved their weekend or got them out so that they could go riding, or saved a race for somebody because you could remove a nut or a bolt that was broken, or you put a motor together for somebody at the last minute and got them out somewhere with through an event or through just to go to the desert. I remember working till 2 or 3 in the morning with you just to get everybody to Thanksgiving, because that was such a huge holiday.
If I had things to do over again, I would have bought more machinery so that I could do more things. Because so much of the stuff that I done was one off by hand. And being self-taught on a lot of things, you don't see the easy way. Or I can remember when I was first going, I bored and honed a lot of cylinders, and I wanted a Sun and Hone, the big one with the stroker. It was $10,000. I didn't have $10,000, and I done that all by hand, and I think back on it. If I'd have bought the damn thing and financed it, I'd have saved hours of work.
It had paid for itself.
And it had paid for itself, but I didn't want to get over my head in debt, and because you didn't, there was times when things got lean and you had to
figure it out.
You had to figure it out. You had to take in jobs that just to pay the bills. But That's in the past. And
It's pretty amazing though, the amount of work that you do and have done and the things that you've taught us to do on the machinery that we use, because some of the machines are pretty archaic, but they still work good. They still cut true. They still do what they're supposed to do. And we may not be modernized in some areas, but we've got a system down and it works pretty well, and we can do the work that needs to be done.
well, a lot of the things have some of the machines that I have now, I needed when I was working on stuff early, because of the fact that you needed to hone bushings and you needed to hone this or that. Now everything, is almost ready to fit. The Japanese and stuff is, if you took a batch of them apart and threw them in a pile, they interchange. There are the old motorcycles were kind of hand built. You worked on a Harley or a Triumph or a BSA or Norton. The good ones were almost hand built. You had to fit everything to it. So you needed a lot of the different equipment.
They have made it a lot easier on us nowadays with the quality of the componentry that we get to work with. And there's a lot of things that I think that myself and other guys that have been around as long as I have, we've gotten the benefit of learning how to fix a lot of stuff, because we have worked on so many of the old school projects that you had to make fit. It's just like when the aftermarket chassis started in the industry and I'm not talking about Roll, and I'm really not talking about Leggers, I'm talking about JP or some of the other guys that are, the parts didn't fit, and there was other things that we dealt with that didn't fit. It was crazy because you had to learn how to get this A-arm in the frame because they weren't going to build you another one. And once you got it in there and you got the bolt in, it worked. But you had to come up with the old school ways, which thankfully I had a guy that taught me a lot of cool stuff.
Well, when I was first went into working in a motorcycle shop, accessories didn't fit. You had to massage them to get things on. I can remember shortly before I went to work for the motorcycle shop, Valley Motors, they had a racer that was working in the shop, and he was trying to put a pair of side pipes on something, and nothing lined up. He couldn't fit, and he got a little pissed and beat the pipes on the workbench, and
destroyed them.
Just destroyed them. But stuff like that, it didn't fit, and you had to make it fit, because if you sent it back, they sent you another one that was made on the same jig that didn't work. There were the aftermarket stuff was
poor at best.
Was very poor. The aftermarket people nowadays, most of the stuff fits like they advertise, but like it's supposed to. But that has nothing to do with hopping up 90s, I know. But the same thing. I had a bunch of manifolds built early on.
They didn't fit.
They didn't fit worth a shit,
So you had to make them all work.
Yeah, I had to undo some of the things that were done and redo. You had a jig that if you welded them and everything matched, it would have, but they didn't match the jig. It's like the guy took them out of the jig so I could weld them better. But the welds looked beautiful, but the parts didn't work.
Right.
So, along with everything else, but the hop-up work on at the time with the styles was kind of what you done to the 90, you could do to the 110, which you could do to the 70, which you could do to so many different ones.
Some of the motorcycle models had a similar engine in it.
I done a lot of big bores and stuff for motorcycles, and it just depends on what the guy wants. I put some big carburetors on a 350 twin for a guy that only worked when it was twisted all the way open.
That's what he wanted.
And he was a street bike. That's what he wanted, but you couldn't hardly ride the damn thing. But when you turned it on, it hauled ass. But try riding it through traffic with it flopping and spinning and.
Well, that's the guy that calls up wants a high rev top end motor, and he's a trail riding bottom end mid range rider, and you have to explain it to him. Not always do they listen.
Well, when I worked for Edison Dye, I had a S90, kind of like the one I got out
on the workbench.
On the workbench, and
it's a step through 90.
No, this was like the white one.
Okay, yeah, it's got the.
And it's a overhead overhead cam, single cylinder. That thing would run at 60, 65 miles an hour on the freeway. But it wasn't legal. I had a Jeep that we took on trade that I drove that worked hard to get to 45. And I used to think, they don't judge on what the performance. The sign says no motorbikes, and the 90 was a motorbike. And I always thought it's funny that 90 would just whistle right along with traffic, but the Jeep couldn't hardly pull itself.
Well, Dad, everybody, I know you're not supposed to use Dad, but he's my dad, and I love him to death, and I really, really appreciate you sitting down and taking some time with me. And I hope everybody enjoys this as much as I have, just sitting here and listening and talking with him. And you got to realize that in the evolution of where we come from in the ATV world, past, present, and future, in the past, we're rolling back into the 70s, where some of the youngsters that ride today don't even realize that we started way back then. I was 4 years old in 1969 on my first ride. You rolled into,
and your grandmother thought I was killing you.
Well, yeah, but fortunately that didn't happen, and here we are, and we're having a good run. We're still going. We're still doing it, and you're still here teaching us and keeping us in line, and that's what matters. And again, I just appreciate everybody taking the time to listen. There's a lot to teach there. There's a lot to listen if you take the time and understand some of the lessons. They're subtle, but they're there. And thanks again, Dad, for sitting down with us at ATV Talk. It means the world to me.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. We'll talk to you later.
The team here at ATV Talk would love your feedback. Please email us at hello@atvtalkpodcast.com.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, don't forget to rate us on all available platforms and share us with your loved ones. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook for more ATV Talk news. See you next time.